The Outer Worlds. Let's get to it. Okay,
Yeah.
so we went out to Obsidian. Let's see. Maybe just a biggest impression, Miller.
Yeah, The Outer Worlds is, in a lot of ways, what I think you hope it's going to be.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think it got a lot of excitement from the community out there because it looked like it was like, this is like Fallout, but it's not Fallout, and it's in outer space, so it's a new setting, and I'm excited about that. And it's from the people who made the original Fallout. All of the resulting conclusions that your mind might be coming to, or at least most of them, are kind of accurate. This is a game that feels a lot like the tone of Fallout, but with its own twist. It's sort of like exploring a mix between pulp sci-fi with, ray guns and rocket ships and stuff like that, put through the lens of like modern capitalism and sort of like poking fun of that.
It's a whole thing. Like at some point, Fergus, the CEO of Obsidian, said that the original pitch that they had internally was, let's make something that's Firefly meets Fallout.
Yeah,
and then at a certain point, I think it was Leonard. He said that like one of the big epiphanies is like, coming up with a vision of kind of a diesel punk Deadwood was one of his tones that he had in mind for one area at least.
And so it feels like the way you would hope that a game like this would feel. I think one of the things that we came away with that was an important impression is that they were refreshingly honest with us about the scope of the game, right? This is a first outing for this franchise. It isn't a Fallout that, has years and years of background and a giant publisher behind it pouring, like hundreds of millions of dollars in. It's not the most gigantic game that's ever been made.
Totally.
But it is one that feels like every part of it is being crafted and created to hit a particular vibe and give people that sense that they want of a choice-driven RPG where you're doing things that your playthrough is going to be very different from Joe's playthrough, which is going to be different from my playthrough.
They definitely know their audience. It's really refreshing. It's like, this is an RPG-ass RPG studio, and it's like they know exactly what they like from the RPGs, which is very fun to have Joe there because Joe's such a big systems guy when it comes to RPGs. So
I do like that stuff.
Hear him bounce off to figure out how the skill progression works, and like every time they would talk about a skill check, Miller, I saw your eyeballs bulge out of your skull like a cartoon wolf. It's just like a good, satisfying RPG deep dive on the Discover Story trip.
Yeah, one thing I do want to clarify a little bit because, like Miller was talking about with the scope, and this game being everything you think it was. Just to put it in plain terms, and I don't mean that this is bad, but like you might see this game and think this is Fallout New Vegas again, right? Like this is Fallout New Vegas with a more like diesel punk Deadwood sort of look. And I mean, the impression I got from them is like it is not that big.
No, it's not. There's a lot of debate internally about how do we frame how big this thing is. Some people are like KOTOR 2. Some people are like, I guess Fallout New Vegas, but no, not quite. It's smaller than that. It's maybe even smaller than KOTOR 2. Like, I see a lot of confusion out there on the internet still, and a lot of comments of people being like, this is Obsidian Cyberpunk. It's like, no. Like,
but I think with all that being said, I also did not get the impression that this is like, oh, you're going to play this game for like 6 hours and be done.
No.
Yeah.
Like,
at some point, Leonard said, he said, hey, you'll get a decent gameplay experience. It's not a 5-hour game, I promise.
Yeah.
Unless there's some speedrunners in the future, but it's not going to be like a 5-hour experience.
Even what we saw and the areas that we saw, which was only one part of the game, made it really clear to me that this is going to feel like a robust role-playing experience. The skill system that they have in place, there's no way you'd be able to like fully flesh that out and experience it in a really short game. It's not that. But I just, in a lot of ways, I wish that the community around the game would focus on other things about it, because like I know that there's an excitement about, well, it's going to be this gigantic game, or no, it's not going to be that. But the real kicker for me is understanding that like a lot of that doesn't matter if the game itself, the thing you're playing, is really fun and it's replayable and there's lots of options that you can like go back and play through it again and have a totally different experience. And I think that's what they're going for.
Totally. And I think like from my perspective, I really love South Park Stick of Truth, and going on that cover story trip back in 2011 and visiting Obsidian, I had flashbacks to that because as much as I love that game, they were talking about like, we want you to really feel an attachment to every weapon you get and really savor all these experiences. And then Stick of Truth was definitely on the shorter end of the spectrum, and it was just like rapid fire systems, here's a new mechanic, here's a new weapon, okay, that's useless, you're in a new room, now you have a new weapon. And so I think that ended up hurting the gameplay and kind of the progression systems in some way. So I think they definitely maybe learned some lessons from that game overall. And for this game then, it's a lot of confusing phrasing, I think, for the average gamer about like, it's not a AAA game, it's a AA game. We don't have infinite
what
budget.
does that mean?
And they kept just saying, hey, time and budget. We're like huge for this thing. But it's important to remember too, it's not even like 2K publishing this thing. It is Private Division, which is kind of the indie side label for 2K.
Yeah.
So it is a constrained development. And they definitely talked a lot about, there's a real budget on this thing. We're really doing the most we can, but don't expect the moon.
Yeah. But I want to say, like, from the time that I saw, like, this game did not scream like budget title to me.
No, it didn't to me either.
No.
And and as tempting as it is to sort of make it's Obsidian, it's like minds behind Fallout, like as tempting as it is to sort of immediately jump to that New Vegas connection, I think that there's a lot going on in the Outer Worlds that like recommends it as its own thing and not just the way that it like recalls something else, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the tone in particular is what recalls Fallout. That idea of this sort of meeting point between humor and dark social commentary. It's different things they're commenting on here than they are in Fallout. I think oftentimes of Fallout as being a lot about like talking about the futility of war and the way that people like do violence against each other and that kind of thing. And that's what that game is most concerned with. And this game is really interested in things like capitalism and the absurdity of tribalism and the way that people like put themselves into camps that don't really have any meaning. And why are you doing that?
It was fun talking to them about the lore and the setup for this game. That's maybe the most fun part, is just talking about world building with these guys.
Yeah.
But they had an interesting take, which is like, hey, in the world of the Outer Worlds, or the universe of the Outer Worlds, however you want to frame it, however you want to frame it there's no racism or sexism, but there's a ton of classism.
Yeah.
It's just more classism than you could possibly expect. Like fun details, like the idea of being unemployed in this world.
It's you're like a leper or something.
It is
like
horrific and scary. And they had a fun way of putting it at some point where they said, ultimately, Tim said, it's a dystopia that thinks it's a utopia.
Yep.
Which is a very funny perspective on this thing.
Yeah, I love it. The whole world is built around these like corporations that have bought up a whole solar system. So imagine all the worst corporations you can think of in the world, advance them a couple hundred years into the future, and then they get together as a little cabal and go off to the distant edge of the galaxy and establish an entire society of colonists built on how to maximize corporate profit, right? And things have gone like horribly wrong because, of course, that didn't work.
One of my favorite details about this was the fact that like the comparison being, imagine at like your workplace in your like kitchen or break room or whatever, there's that big sign on the wall that's like employees' rights. These are your rights as an employee. Yeah. They say that like in the universe of the Outer Worlds, that sign in a workplace would be a list of employers' rights.
Yeah. It's a very simple way of looking at it. Yeah, for sure. So everyone's just obsessed with corporations. Like the city we saw is Edgewater, and they're obsessed with salt tuna.
Yeah, a salmon tuna hybrid that they all they do is can it. They don't even produce it.
Right.
They're just the canning plant. But they haven't been getting like the same amount of salt tuna coming in for them to can, and so they've started adding additives that are going to make it more healthy, namely rocks.
Yeah.
Good minerals and stuff. But they're all still completely buying the corporate line.
Oh,
like
totally.
Spacer's Choice is the corporation. They just like casually say the slogans.
It's not the best choice. It's the Spacer's Choice.
It's good.
Right?
It's good. And they even say stuff like there's a plague infecting Edgewater.
Yeah.
And then the characters will be like, I'm about to go to that great cannery in the sky. Like everything is from the perspective of their careers and from these corporations.
So the basic setup is that your character like has been thought out basically from a second colony ship. So like this area of the galaxy was colonized when a first ship with sort of like essential personnel and resources came. Mm-hmm. And then they were waiting on the second colony ship full of the people who would sort of, lubricate all the gears essentially.
Right.
And that ship, for reasons that I don't think that they've totally gone into, but that ship arrived late.
Like really late.
Really late. So by the time it gets there, the society's already sort of underway and kind of collapsing.
And they kind of forgot that there was even a second ship on the way.
Well,
It's like-
Or they stopped counting on, they stopped like looking for it, you know? And then it got there, and then when it got there, they didn't quite know what to do about it because they didn't really have the resources to support all these people now. And so your character is basically someone that a scientist has thought out and has sort of set out. So you're a newcomer to the world.
And it's the fun idea too of, it's like, okay, all these frozen people on the ship, a lot of them are dead or whatever, and the scientist is choosing to thaw one person. So there's like 10,000 people on the racks, and the scientist is choosing, as you create your character, like, oh, let's see, is it this one? Is it this one over here? And because they're all just the dumb menial jobs, that's the point of the second wave, like, it'll give you what your role would have been in this society. It's like, for our demo, it's like, oh, it turns out a character was the elevator operator specialist.
Right.
That was his sole duty.
Or you're going to be a beverage transporter.
Yes.
Yeah.
So literally, like just a waiter.
Yeah.
Right.
Or a bartender.
And that was your
that
lot
was your
for life.
lot in life.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of going out there in the world, and at least initially, you have this goal. Your scientist who woke you up, Dr. Phineas, right? He is trying to encourage you, like, hey, we got to wake the rest of these colonists up, and there's help. He needs help to do that. And so initially, that you think that's kind of the story, and it can be the story. But you can also just turn Phineas in.
He's got a bounty on his
He's got a bounty on his head. And so your story could just be something totally different, which again speaks to the kind of game that Obsidian is wanting to make here. One where your choices really make a difference, both in the story as well as in how you progress your character and the gameplay.
And yes, systems-wise, like you will just get a boatload of cash for turning this character in, which is a very fun idea.
Yeah. And I realize that the way we talk about that now makes it sound like this is a sort of one or the other, like good or evil kind of option when it comes to choice.
Yeah.
But they really don't see it that way. Like the way we talk about it here makes it sound like that. But is it really evil to turn this guy in and get a bunch of money? And like, who knows what, you're not sure that his motivations are the best. And so I think they talk a lot about this like morally gray space that they don't want to make judgments like what you're doing is good or evil. It's just more, it seems like they're taking a more pragmatic approach to player choice, right?
Right. At a certain point, they talked about storylines in the game, and it kind of can branch. It's not so much that they're two separate storyline tracks ultimately the game, but they said it's the same storyline, but you can see it from different angles depending on the choices you make throughout the game.
Well, and you're going to get the thing at the end where you get different ending slides that you see how all your choices have impacted the people you've interacted with and what happened on these different locations you went to. And so it'll have that vibe that I think people who play these kind of games are familiar with what I'm talking about there.
Yeah. And I'm not a Fallout guy like at all, but I love Mass Effect. And so it was a weird thing going into this trip, just expecting Fallout, maybe I'll play this game, I don't know. But the combination of, I got so many good kind of simple Mass Effect vibes, and honestly the idea of it being a shorter RPG, like that is such a juicy double whammy. Just like a systems focused shorter RPG that seems like it's taking a lot of cues from Mass Effect. Like, I'm on board.
I mean, like Mass Effect or KOTOR, one of the things is that it is not a big open world. This, again, speaks to the scope of the game.
Right.
It is a bunch of distinct locales that you go to, and you kind of explore that environment, and then you take off in your rocket ship and you go someplace else. And so if you think about those games like Mass Effect, that's really how it was. There was sometimes the illusion that it was a big open world, where oftentimes, especially in the early Mass Effects, it wasn't, right? It was like you land here and you move along this space and do your objective there, and then you move on to a new thing in a different place.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking of doing your objectives, I'm also excited about the sort of like their approach to giving players options for different things.
Yeah,
like,
play style.
Yeah,
options.
the different play style options. Just because it's like I'm used to there are several of them they talk about that seemed like what you would expect, a stealth-focused one, a more combat-focused one. I liked the idea of a more, like, there's one that's a little more like charisma-focused, like persuasion, like you talk your way out of things.
Is it the leadership?
No, but that's even separate from that.
And
right?
then there's a leadership option, which they describe as sort of you augmenting your own skills and leaning more on, I mean, you still have your own skills, but it's you sort of using your companions in smart ways to augment your abilities based on different situations too.
Because they're each like tagged with a different skill set that'll affect
Right,
overall
right.
you have
And
in
these
your
aren't
party.
these aren't like distinct classes that you choose. That's not the kind of game this is. You're not like, hey, I'm a thief, I'm a warrior, or whatever. Like your play style is defined by what you invest your skill points in, the weapons you invest in, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so that leadership idea speaks to a capability to, at least over the scope of the full game, being kind of a generalist, right? Where you're going to put enough points into those leadership capabilities for your character that you can then choose which companion you bring in, and that companion then lends part of their skill set to your own. So if you know you need to go out and you want to do kind of a stealthy run at this one particular mission, then you bring your character who's good, your companion who is good at stealth, and because your leadership is high, you also get some of that stealth.
Right.
And that's neat.
I thought it was a very smart question, Miller. At some point, you're talking to Tim and Leonard, like you mentioned, the original creators of Fallout. You said that question of, it's a lot of referencing like the early days of interplay in Fallout for design inspirations, but you asked him, like, how has your design sensibility evolved since then? Because, hey, it's been like over 20 years here, fellas.
Long time.
I don't know exactly how much progression there's been. And they had the interesting take of like, oh, it's basically just getting more and more used to hybrids of classes, like having the stealth combined with the combat, or the leadership thing is kind of that weird, more nebulous area. But that was their take for where they've been, because it's an odd history with those two. Yeah. They eventually split off. They worked at Troika together, made Vampire Masquerade, The Masquerade. Which, did you play that, Joe?
I didn't play it. I think it's JV who was really into it.
JV's obsessed with it, And then Wildstar and Leonard went and worked on Diablo 3 on the narrative team for, I think he spent like 10 years at Blizzard, something like that. And it's a cool idea that these two then are reunited at Obsidian with their old coworker Fergus as the CEO. And it's like, all right, make a new IP, make it good, here we go.
I mean, that really speaks to what my favorite part of this trip was. And I hope that in our coverage this month we can communicate some of that. I mean, you put up our rapid fire interview with them that Joe did recently. And it speaks a little bit to this dynamic of these two people who are acting as co-directors here. And I really want people to be able to see that the way that we saw it during our trip there. Because these are two gentlemen who have worked together in games, and their careers have like careened back and forth into each other repeatedly, right? And to see a team of such like this partnership that is as creative as they are coming back together after having crafted Fallout so many years ago is really fascinating, right? Because you can see the ways that they just sort of play off of each other's strengths and work together in to find the things that each of them can bring to the game, and that they recognize the things that each of them can bring to the game. And the way that they talk with each other reflects that.
And there's certain design sensibilities that goes back to the CRPG era, stuff like, they have a producer on this game, Eric DeMille, who you find out like, he also worked on Fallout 1, and the reason you can kill everybody in Fallout games is because this Eric guy back in the day, when he was testing the original game, was like, I'm just going to murder absolutely everybody. And they're like, okay, we need to support that. And then that snowball just continues and has a big impact on overall Western RPG design.
Yeah, and when you talk about the way their philosophy has evolved towards game design, I mean, I think we saw a lot of that when we saw The Outer Worlds, but there is a pillar there that still seems very firmly rooted in original Fallout, and that's just that concept of like the player dictating their own path, the player making the choices and making the game that they want to play. I think is, was what that game was that was Fallout, and that still seems to hold true here.
Including like having the dumb option as the playthrough for dialogue options. You can do a dumb run through this entire thing. And it's talking about like, why are you guys so attracted to doing a dumb playthrough of this game? Why is that an option? It's like, Tim's like, I did some D&D campaign in high school where we thought it was really funny, so now we have to work it into our games. I don't know.
I think that was the other thing about talking with them that really struck home for me is that if you look back through the annals of role-playing game design, especially in North America, how foundational Fallout is hard to overstate, right? And the fact that emerged kind of on a whim almost, right? Like he talks about, I mean, he was getting together with, it was mostly folks he played D&D with, who he just kind of called in and said like, hey, I got a pizza and I wrote this engine for a game and I want to make a game. And they all like got together in like a meeting room and chatted it up while they were at an interplay. But there's also this dynamic between the two of them that they both loved that tabletop role-playing game experience in different ways when they were younger, right? And that led them into wanting to make games like Fallout. And to see that kind of lineage in the way that it has then blossomed out because other people were inspired by that, and now you see it across all sorts of different games, that approach to choice-driven play, and all kind of rooting back to these guys who are like, yeah, you know, we liked games like D&D and GURPS where we could make any character we wanted, and we could do anything we wanted, and we wanted to like bring that to the screen. It was really cool to talk with them about it.
Yeah, and just their overall sensibilities too is interesting, talking about like, yeah, we're sick of RPG protagonists by the end of the game being walking gods, as they put it. And so a system that they've been wanting to do for a while, Tim in particular, it seems like, is this flaw system of you can have a weird trade-off at certain points in the game of you can take a flaw, a very real flaw that we can go into for your character, but if you take that permanent flaw, then you also get a perk immediately. And you can have 15 perks, which was like walk faster was one of them. I'm trying to remember other examples.
I think there's some that they're still trying to decide on. I mean,
right.
And I don't even know that the numbers are final. I don't know if we want to put a stamp on 15.
Okay, somewhere around there.
But there's a lot of them, right? And the idea being that you would take these and they're not things you can respec. It lets you respec other aspects of your characters, but your flaws are your flaws. And so if you're afraid of robots, you're afraid of robots. And that's kind of the way that it is. And in exchange, you get a really cool perk, right?
And when they started listing out the perks, it seemed like, okay, because at first you hear that, and it's like, there's no universe where I'm going to accept that deal.
Well, because the flaws, it's not just you're scared of robots. It would be something like you, let's say that as a player, you have multiple encounters with robots and you get like severely damaged. The game tracks all kinds of things like that. So then once you hit a certain threshold of like, wow, this guy's getting his butt kicked by robots, the game gives you the option to be like, do you want to be a whatever robophobe? And that means that you take increased damage from robots.
Right.
Or if you like walk through fire a lot and then you take burn damage or whatever, then suddenly it's like, well, hey, do you want to be particularly susceptible to fire?
And the answer is no.
These are not small things where you're like, well, gee, I'm never going to need to use like that stat or that ability. So yeah, I'll take it's like, you're going to run into robots.
It will affect the way you play the game.
There will be fire.
Right.
Like, yeah, it is a cost.
It's a different way, I think, like what you said before about like Tim being a little bit sick of role-playing game design being everything about just fostering this ultimate power fantasy. I mean, obviously that's part of it. You want to level up, you want to get better, that kind of thing. But I think that he is tapping into something that like that in the tabletop role-playing game world has been a fixture for a long time, which is that like sometimes the thing that is fun isn't being the best. It's having a unique character that makes you laugh, or that you just like, it's really funny to like take a really low intelligence and then go through conversations and have these choices that all your companions look at you and are like, are you serious right now?
Including this, like even like at the end of the game, you can make a very stupid choice. Your companions are like, no, you don't have this, dude. Don't do it.
Yeah, where you have like a critical misunderstanding of the stakes.
Misunderstanding. And we don't know what it is yet, but that like, it almost makes me want to do the dumb playthrough just to get to figure out what that thing is at the end of the game, the catastrophic choice that you make just because you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you take a step back from that and understand that, like, whether it's the flaws or like taking a low intelligence so you get the dumb things, it's a way of understanding what is fun about role-playing games,
right,
through the lens of like, you know, narrative and unique characters is what makes it fun a lot of the times, not just I can do 150 damage instead of 100 damage.
And it's such just almost like a weird system, a simple system of trying to bribe gamers to take that flaw. I just love how blatant it is. It's just like, look, make your character more interesting. We'll give you good stuff. Just please make your character more interesting.
And to say if you are a compulsive optimizer like I am,
Yeah.
and the idea of taking those flaws is like I'm not taking extra damage from robots.
Right.
You don't have to. The flaws
totally
are
optional.
the flaws are a totally optional thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And they definitely pushed another one of those signs that maybe the game's going to be shorter than you'd expect or than most RPGs out there is them pushing the idea of like, it's going to be very replayable.
Yeah.
You'll want to replay this and choose different options, have different flaws, different skill sets, all that stuff.
There's a bunch of difficulty settings as well. And as you go up in difficulty setting, you can take more flaws.
Which, yeah, the idea of that is like, because it's like on a normal playthrough, you can have 3 flaws. If you're on hard, you can have 4. And if you're on the hardest, which I think they're calling Supernova,
yeah.
you can take 5 flaws because you get those 5 extra perks.
Right.
But imagine playing like the super hardcore difficulty where you're just taking all kinds of extra damage.
Or your stats are always lowered every time you're
Yeah.
encountering a particular enemy type. Like, I think it's a unique way to approach difficulty, and I think people will hopefully embrace that.
Yeah, I think so. It's also an interesting trip and an interesting time for Obsidian overall because it's very bizarre to be at this now Microsoft-owned studio, but there was no Microsoft representation around. There's no PR person from Microsoft there. It was a bizarre environment, right? It felt like a very from Microsoft? No. There's no Microsoft employee there.
Okay.
Well, I guess they're all technically
There
Microsoft
were some Microsoft
employees.
people around, but not in any way that was like getting in the way of our work or pausing conversations or anything like that.
It was just a very refreshing time, I think, to see Fergus in particular, who we've worked with before. He's been on the podcast before, the CEO of the company, just kind of understanding the new realm. And it seems like in this phase, at least, from our 2 days at the studio, that Microsoft was pretty hands off, letting them do what they wanted, which is very nice. It was just nice to talk to Fergus. We're gonna have an interview with him later in the month here, just talking about like, hey, getting out of the rat race of trying to survive as a big indie studio and how difficult that can be. Just to, hey, it seems like we can trust Microsoft now. This seems to be a net positive for everybody. Let's go for it.
Yeah, I am hopeful that turns out well for them. I mean, the conversations with Fergus made it clear to me, certainly, that the task of running a big independent studio like they have been doing for a long time now is just, it is increasingly with each passing year more devastatingly complex to do.
Right.
There are reasons why there are so many studios that have made the choice to, work with a larger publisher as they now have with Microsoft, because it's just hard to stay afloat, even when you make really strong games, as I think by and large Obsidian has made good games.
Right. But now it's that weird thing where there's still so many people confused or speculating about what is going on with the Outer Worlds. Is it an Xbox exclusive, which it is not.
No.
So they were working on this game for years before the Microsoft acquisition came by, and in theory, it's not going to be affected by that.
The messaging we received, unless there's something there just explicitly not telling us, is that this is a private division game. It's moving forward. Everything's great. There's no hard feelings. Microsoft isn't pissed about it. They're happy because they have a studio that is making a game that people are excited about, and ultimately at the end of the day, that's probably good for Microsoft if they release a game that does well.
So when they make a new Microsoft IP, they can say, from the creators of the Outer Worlds, like they want this to succeed.
I think they do. I think there might be some conspiracy theory out there that there's bad feelings there or something, and we didn't get any sense of that.
No. One of the big mysteries, which is still bizarre, is trying to figure out, like, one of the things Fergus wouldn't talk about is, hey, if you guys ever make an Outer Worlds 2, which, by the way, Tim and Leonard talk a lot about Outer Worlds 2 and how much they want to make it.
They really have some thought. Yeah. Like, normally, I mean, a little background is like, normally when we go on trips like that, we always ask about like, hey, like, what are your plans for this? Like, if this is successful, is there a sequel in the works or an expansion?
Or there's
whatever?
a one-off joke about we'll save this for the sequel. You know?
Yeah, things like that. But normally the answer to that, I mean, there's a very scripted sort of response that we get most of the time, which is, if people love the game, that would be great, and we'd be interested in exploring that. But really, right now, we are laser focused on making this game the best it can be.
Or just a straight up no comment.
Yeah,
right?
or that. But yeah, this was unusual in that. I'm not saying that they like totally spilled the beans, but they were very open about like, oh yeah, we'd love to do another one. We have ideas for another one, and yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But anyways, Fergus wouldn't talk about who would technically own the Outer Worlds 2, and that's where it gets into that weird thing, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think with Private Division, the developer still owns the IP. And so at that point, they would own the Outer Worlds. And then if Microsoft owns them, in theory, it might transition.
I'll be honest, I really don't know how that dynamic would work. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't purport to try to explain it. I think it's enough to know that the game that has been announced, The Outer Worlds,
Right.
is coming out. It is being published by Private Division.
Right.
It
and
is
they're paying for
multi-platform.
And it is absolutely coming out on PC, on Xbox, and on PS4.
Yeah, and as far as, hey, is it going to come out on Steam or just the Microsoft Store? I would imagine Steam. But if you want to learn maybe some answers to the gameplay overall or the business of Obsidian, how all this stuff is going down, at the end of the month, we're going to Skype in, hopefully, Tim and Leonard. So we'll send out a call on GameFormer.com, and you can leave a comment or a question there, and then we'll ask them the ones that seem answerable at this point without spoiling anything about the game. So that's coming up at the end of the month.
Yeah.
Exciting times. Let's see, what else?
Well, I think that one of the other things that we touched on with the leadership thing is that there's companions here, and I think that that's something that I often, when I hear about it in a game, I get excited about. You are going to have your own ship that serves as a sort of a base, right? And your companions will wait in the ship, and you'll be able to go have conversations with them. It reminds me of something like Mass Effect or KOTOR in that regard.
The companions also have like specific quests that you go on for them that then enhance their unique like combat special move and stuff like that.
Right.
So that's a cool thing. I think that they have they've been pretty open about the fact that there's not going to be like spaceship combat or anything like that, and there's not going to be gameplay related ways that you're customizing your ship, but that you are going to be able to change some things about the interior, right? You'll have your own like captain's room, and as you get collectibles throughout the game world, those will go into your room. Your allies, your companions also have their own rooms, and as you complete their quests, those get populated with new stuff, and that changes the decor, which is kind of fun.
Can't romance your companions. We've talked about
They've
before.
been pretty clear about
They
that.
say repeatedly, time and budget, time and budget, time and budget.
Yeah, and I want to say something about that too, because they don't say time and budget like, oh, our hands are tied, or yeah, we're not really making a good game because we don't have the time or money for it.
Yeah, they didn't say that, believe it or not.
No. Well, no, but I mean, when you say time and budget, I think to a lot of people that comes out saying like, we are limited, we are restricted. And I think that's true, but not necessarily in a way that is like, well, this game isn't as good as it could be or should be.
It's a choice that they've made about where they want to put their focus.
Yeah.
I think they are being, again, refreshingly honest. There are lots of times that we see early looks at games, and there's so much hyperbole, and there's so much like talking about systems that, well, this is just one example of the way things are going to be, but it really is the only example, right? Like that happens all the time when we go and see early looks at stuff. And I was very pleased that when we sat down with almost everybody we talked to at Obsidian, that they just said, we're trying to make the best game that we can, and we know that it's a first game in a franchise that we'd love for it to go on past this, but right now we're focused on that, and this is what we can do. And sure, I mean, you can make the argument, well, they could have prioritized romances or some other thing that you want in the game, but they didn't. They said there were other things like being able to have multiple difficulty settings, maybe, or having as many choices in the dialogues, or having different companions be present, right? Those are all things that they wanted to be able to do, and that's where they put their focus, and they were open about that stuff.
Yeah, and they're very humble about like, we hope we can stick the landing. A lot of things, it's tough development. Yeah. Games are always tough to make, but it's going in the rightish direction here.
Yeah, and I guess that's mainly why I wanted to bring it up, I guess, is because I appreciate the fact that they are not over-promising in some way here, or trying to put a spin on something that feels like a misstep. Like anytime they couldn't do something or didn't do something the way that you might expect, it's always like, yeah, we thought about that, but we decided to focus on something else instead.
Right.
And I would say one of the other things we haven't talked about is just the combat itself, which is a pretty core aspect of gameplay. I thought it looked good, like this isn't, they're not going for a Destiny or Call of Duty here, right? But it does have a a lot of interesting things about it. You've got this sort of tactical time delay thing, or dilation, I think is what they call, which is a lot like VATS.
Yeah, very different.
It's not exactly that.
So it slows things down, and what I like about it, it's a little bit like Super Hot or something, right? Where you can look around and you can plan out what you want to do exactly, and it won't deplete your meter. But
or
if you
deplete slower.
Right, but if you make any sort of action, then that will deplete your slow-mo meter more. So it effectively is close enough to VATS.
Yeah. And you have options, you can pursue melee, range. There's multiple categories of like long guns or handguns, heavy melee or light melees.
And these are all things that you invest skill points in. Yep. So if you invest more in melee weapons, you do more damage that way at certain like thresholds along the progression for those skills, you get certain like perks and bonuses too. So
and that in turn leads to maybe one of my favorite aspects of the game, which we are going to talk about more later in the month, which is the science weapons, which are super fun.
Shrink ray is the one that they
ray is the one that we got a chance to look at really closely. But they implied to us that there's going to be a science weapon for each category of weapon that you could get. So there'll be like a long gun science weapon, and there'll be a light melee science weapon.
There was one, we didn't get to see it, and they wouldn't elaborate on it, but it had the code name the Ugly Stick or something.
One of the melee ones. So
that's right.
The idea behind the science weapons is that they're all unique, one-of-a-kind things that you find in the world, and they break the rules, right? Like Obsidian has been very careful to create very clear rules about the way physics work in their game world and the way science works and all that kind of stuff. And the science weapons are the one thing that doesn't pay attention to that and just can do whatever they want. And they've used that to just have each one of them be very strange things. Often things they've said that show up as bugs first in the game. And they're like, that's hilarious. Yeah. And so we're going to put it in the game as a science weapon.
And not necessarily overpowered either. Just strange.
So like the Shrink Ray takes advantage of a thing that they figured out, that they have scaling for their enemies. And so they were
because there's like mega fauna every once in a while where it's like this version of an enemy you've seen before, but now it's going to be big.
And so they were like, well, why don't we just make a weapon that takes advantage of that and makes everything teensy tiny? And it gets tinier as your science skill goes up. And so you have this all of a sudden this reason to focus on science as being, again, in a science fiction sort of pulpy game, so that you can use your crazy Shrink Ray gun better than somebody who doesn't have that, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Hey, GameInformer.com/The Outer Worlds, an entire month of content. Some new exclusive gameplay that'll be going up, I think, early next week, but just a lot of info. Like, one I'm looking forward to is talking about, I think, Joe, are you writing this one about the locations?
I think I'm writing up things about just kind of talking about the setting a little bit more. Obviously, our magazine article that is available now digitally and is going out to print subscribers over the next couple of weeks here. That touches on all the stuff we're talking about today and goes into a little bit more detail about all these subjects and offers an overview of what our experience was. And then every one of the features that we're doing this month drills down into a particular thing. So we're looking at science weapons and the Shrink Ray. We're looking more at, talking more with Leonard and Tim about the tone of the game. We're talking to Fergus about what's going on with Obsidian. So there's a bunch of things that if people, whether you're an enthusiast for the work that Obsidian has done, or you just are really excited about what you've heard of the Outer Worlds, I think there's some cool stuff we've got coming up.
Yeah. Super cool. GameInformer.com/Outer Worlds. That was just a clip from a larger show called The Game Informer Show. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, or GameInformer.com. We take the fun opportunities and exclusive information from Game Informer magazine and boil it into a show that airs every Thursday with exclusive cover story information, developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So come love games with us.